Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This is going to be a short episode. It's just really looking at one little idea on the Chris Watts case. Did Chris Watts confuse Oxycontin for Oxytocin? And you might think it is a silly sort of allegation, but as you're about to see, it's actually got quite a lot of basis. Besides the fact that almost all the same letters appear, there's quite a strong basis to certainly thinking about the point. On Patreon, I've just uploaded the complete audiobook of Two-Face Drilling Through Discovery. It was a really interesting book to narrate, even though I obviously wrote it, but it was an interesting book to just go through the analysis even afterwards. The fifth book in the Two-Face series is a deep dive through the interrogation, through the process of the interrogation, and you really see how they kind of broke into Chris Watts's mind. So it is a systematic and meticulous analysis of the interrogation in the cubicle, not only the polygraph but also Coder's interview with Chris Watts before he was Mirandized. And it really is fascinating to see how his story gradually changed, and just the approach of the agents to not antagonize him but also not let him get away with just saying, I promise you I told you the truth. And so I want to just recommend that you go and check it out. It's on the $5 tier on Patreon. I'll put a link in the description. Of course, if you sign up to the $5 tier, you also get access to other audiobooks on that tier. There's several. Thank you also for your feedback and interest in the last video about Amanda Knox. I will put up a part 2 based on sort of popular interest, I guess, or based on popular demand, I think they say. So I'll put that up. It might be a day or 2 or 3. I'm still going to do the deep dive on the Chris Watts autopsy report sometime this weekend. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed, please do like, share, leave a comment. If you do share, please use the hashtag TCRS. It just makes it easier for other people to find TCRS related coverage, for example, on Twitter. Okay, and let's get started. So the question is, and it is a question, it's speculation, did Chris Watts confuse Oxycontin for Oxytocin? And if you look at the those letters, CONTIN and TOCIN, it's almost the identical letters. And a question that has come up so often on my forums, on Patreon, on YouTube, in people talking to me, they sort of will say quite often, why did Chris Watts think that he could bring about a miscarriage with an opiate? And it's true. It's not the best drug, if you want to put it that way. My response has kind of been just to sort of say hundreds of Americans die daily, literally, from opiate overdose accidentally. So there's a certain proportion that die by accident. They're not suicidal. They're not trying to kill themselves. They just die because it is potentially dangerous and potentially deadly. And people use or abuse these opiates at a greater and greater level, and eventually it kills them. And so the overdose isn't intentional, but that's how easy it is to die from an overdose, right? Now, given that's the case, you would think that if it is so easy to kill an adult, how hard would it be to kill a child? And that is kind of just my argument, is may not be the ideal thing from a murderer's perspective, from his perspective, but from the perspective of, is it potentially deadly, and all that? Yes, it is. The other side to that story is, was it readily available in the Watts home? And the answer is yes, it was. How do we know? Because oxycodone, whether you want to call it oxycodone or Oxycontin, it's essentially the same thing. I've also heard a lot of arguments about that they're different, and yet on the packaging of the medicine packaging, you see both words, oxycodone and Oxycontin. And but this episode is really dealing with it from a little bit of a different perspective, and the perspective is, did Chris Watts kind of get his lines crossed? Did he make a mistake? Did he make an error with what he thought was an effective way of bringing about a miscarriage? Because that is what he wanted to do. He did want to bring about a miscarriage with Shanann. That was his first attempt to, let's call it, fix his sort of situation with Kessinger. He wanted to stop Shanann from having a baby, and he didn't feel like he could talk to her about it. And I mean, I think he did talk to her about it, and she kind of responded kind of indignantly to him and to her friends. You know, if he said, if I was willing to abort, he would, something like that. Chris doesn't want this child, and so that was the situation. And in a hypothetical sense, if Shanann had aborted their child, probably she wouldn't have died, and probably the children wouldn't have died. I'm not advocating abortion. I'm simply saying it looks like that is what Chris Watts wanted, and if he got what he wanted, then he would have felt, how can I put it, the motive to murder, I think, would have diminished. But you could argue that what he really wanted was a divorce, and arguably an instant divorce, and so it wouldn't have mattered whether Shanann had an abortion or not. Of course, if she had an abortion, I think she would have pursued a divorce as well, if that makes sense. But I don't think Shanann would have had an abortion. I don't think she. The divorce thing is a little bit different, because she had gotten divorced from Leonard King. But there is another aspect, is that Shanann was a Catholic. Her parents, I think, are as well. She was buried at a Catholic church, and I think there's just a little bit of and I could be mistaken when I say this, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I think there can sometimes be a stronger need to stay married if you're a Catholic person, but I could be wrong. There could be a little bit of a stigma associated with divorce if you're a Catholic person, but as I say, I could be wrong. So the question here is, again, did Chris Watts confuse Oxycontin for Oxytocin? Now, if you Google Oxytocin, it turns out to be a medicine used to induce labor. It's also often used to clear the uterus after an incomplete abortion. So it's not like Oxytocin is just another therapeutic. I don't know if is therapeutic the right word. Another medicine that sounds like Oxycontin, but it's just completely different. And did he confuse those? Oxytocin is a better alternative for a deliberate abortion than Oxycontin. Much better. So in other words, if you want to have an abortion, Oxytocin is effective. Also, if you want to slip it into someone's drink, you could have a situation like that, and that is the impression I got. Is that is what he's trying to do. Now the question is, did he confuse the one with the other or not? It's a little bit of a difficult question, because Oxytocin is an effective medication in that respect, but we're left with a problem. Watts Googled oxycodone, not even Oxycontin. He Googled oxycodone 80 milligrams. And and then he deleted that. We also don't know exactly when he Googled that, but the other issue is, could he have Googled something like Oxycontin, and we just don't know that he did. Bear in mind, there's a heck of a lot missing from the phone data review that's got to do with Watts. That secret calculator app was also very effective in getting rid of his trail of, you know, things, of correspondence, of interactions, right? So also, if you do if you Google oxytocin, some of the search results that come up are, how is oxytocin administered for abortion? And then it says, a small study used a lower concentration with reapplication in 5 hours, followed by intravenous oxytocin administration. Success rates were 80% at 24 hours, and the mean time to abortion was 17.6 hours. So just to be clear, from what I understand, oxytocin is injected. It's not ingested. And so in that sense, it would make it quite difficult to, fortunately, quite difficult to kind of slip into someone's shake or whatever it is. Compared to Oxycontin, oxytocin is a more effective medicine to bring about miscarriage, but common side effects of oxytocin include slow heart rate, fast heart rate, premature ventricular complexes, irregular heartbeats, permanent central nervous system or brain damage, and death secondary to suffocation, neonatal seizure, neonatal yellowing of skin, fetal death. To be fair, as I say, Watts didn't Google oxytocin, and that is where you could make a counter argument to say, no, he didn't confuse them. He didn't Google Oxycontin either, but he Googled oxycodone. Oxycodone is superficially, based on reading the label, interchangeable with Oxycontin. Now, curiously, in Sherilyn Cadle's book, oxycodone is mentioned on seven separate occasions, including at least 2 references where Cadle herself abbreviates it to just oxy. So oxy is also the abbreviation for Occidental Petroleum, the company that acquired Anadarko in early 2019. And Occidental even uses oxy in its own branding. So just to be clear, I'm not trying to create some kind of conspiracy or a link between the oxy of Occidental Petroleum and the oxy of the pharmaceuticals. I'm just simply highlighting that as something of interest. What I do want to highlight is in Watts's letter to Cadle. So in the original letter to Cadle, at the bottom quarter of the page, he refers to Oxycontin, right? Oxycontin, not oxycodone. So we know that he Googled oxycodone. Here in his letter is referring to it as Oxycontin, which again gives you the sense that he knows about it quite well, right? And he says something pretty interesting. He says, the reason the medical examiner found Oxycontin in Shanann's system is because I gave it to her. I thought it would be easier to be with Nicole if Shanann wasn't pregnant. And that is why the question comes up again, is saying Oxycontin. The question comes up, did he mix up the more effective one that sounds like Oxycontin but isn't, right? And Chris Watts is someone who sometimes gets mixed up with the words he uses. Sometimes he says inclination or inkling incorrectly. So, it is possible Watts made a simple error. He also had no idea what the Dead Sea Scrolls were or how to make a campfire. So, it's possible that he got confused with this as well. I'm going to leave you guys with this particular thought, and it's just that on this particular subject of Oxycontin, he talks about the medical examiner found Oxycontin in Shanann's system because I gave it to her. And that is not in the autopsy reports, that's not in the toxicology. And so what that suggests is that the autopsy reports have been abbreviated, have been redacted, aren't complete, or that there's a supplemental to it that we simply haven't seen. It also shows that Chris Watts himself read the discovery, is aware of what's in it, and that there's a discrepancy between what he saw and what he knows and what we've seen and what we know. And I want you to bear that in mind when we talk about the autopsy reports in the episode dealing with that. It's also interesting that on that page of his letter to Sherilyn Cadle, he said something like, if the world knew all of that, I'm pretty sure a new petition would be started to have me put to death. So he's basically saying, thank goodness people didn't know that, that I actually poisoned Shanann, because if they did know, they would really want to get rid of me. They'd really want me to suffer the death penalty. And you kind of get the sense here that certainly at the point when he wrote this letter, that he legitimately did think he was going to get the death penalty. It's also something that comes up when Coda asks him, what do you think should happen if someone did hurt your children? And then he says something like, well, life in prison or the death, and then he sort of stutters and says, does the death penalty still apply? And Coda doesn't really answer him, which is quite clever of him. Coda doesn't say, well, has it been a long time, or it's kind of a lame duck threat, if you want to put it that way. I mean, look at what's happened with Scott Peterson. It's not really applicable to you, or it's not going to be applicable to you. And of course now the death penalty has been officially done away with in Colorado. So the thing that Watts took a plea deal for is actually legally not even in the offing now. So maybe that is why he is wanting to appeal, because he's got nothing to lose now. If it does go to court, the worst that can happen is he gets what he's already got, life in prison without parole. Just a last thing, this entire episode is really thanks to YouTube commenter Jennifer Mullins, who actually brought up the possibility, and when I investigated it, I saw that it certainly is worth thinking about. So thank you to Jennifer. I appreciate all your comments. I do try to respond to all of them. I do look at most of them. So thank you for your feedback. Again, bear in mind the audiobook 28 chapters narrated by me is on Patreon on the $5 tier. And it obviously gives you, if you're on the $5 tier, it obviously gives you access not only to all the other audiobooks, but all the content on the lower tiers, the phone data review, the daily content that is uploaded on the $1 and $2 tiers. I also do a coronavirus diary every now and then on the $3 tier. Anyway, thank you for listening. I hope you guys are safe and well. Have a good weekend. If the elections is stressing you out, just turn off your television. Concentrate on what you can change in your immediate environment. Make sure you're getting enough sleep, eating well, and I'll see you guys next time.